All right, welcome everybody to our first special ed task force event for the Mid-Hudson Task Force region. We have several special ed task forces throughout the state, and we frequently provide these free webinars based on the areas that individuals are looking for more information so that you are prepared to support special ed students and anyone that can access these services. My name is Nancy Nowak, and I am a senior advocate at Disability Rights New York and also a member of the Mid-Hudson Special Ed Task Force. And today we have one of my colleagues that I've worked with for quite a long time with, and her name is Brenda Shannon, and she works in the Client Assistance Program, which is a section of Disability Rights New York as well. And I'm going to let you tell us all about what you do and get right into this wonderful topic where we have, gosh, quite a few people here today. So thank you so much, Brenda.
Thank you for having me today.
Oh, I can't hear you. Let's just see what's going on there. Hold on one second. Okay, see if that works.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, awesome.
Great.
Thank you, Nancy, for having me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm not sure if you guys can see, everyone should be able to see the slide. I don't know if you guys can keep seeing the pop-up that everyone's in the waiting room. So if you can,
No.
you can't.
Okay.
Okay. Good. I'm not good at managing multiple screens while talking. I wish it was a superpower that I had. But thank you for being here. I'm very excited to talk with you all. Nancy has asked me to present on vocational rehabilitation, particularly what comes after high school. And so I have been working with Disability Rights New York for 10 years. I started as a CAP advocate and was promoted to senior advocate. I just briefly as history, I have my master's in social work. I went on to paralegal and got my paralegal certification and love every second of the world that the social work world provides. So I'm excited to kind of share all of my knowledge that I have gathered over the 10 years of working here with you. Today, we will have time for questions at the end. I am not opposed to you unmuting yourself and throwing a question at me if something comes up. I just am not great at monitoring
but I
the
can't
Zoom
get any
screen.
sound.
I'm sorry? Was someone trying to say something? Okay. Again, feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. Stop me at any point. I'm always happy to clarify things. I will talk a little bit at the end of the presentation about Disability Rights New York, but just to give you a little bit of context in the beginning, Disability Rights New York is the protection and advocacy firm in New York State for individuals with disabilities. And just like Nancy said, Disability Rights New York has several programs. We're made up of kind of niche programs, I'll call it. Each program focuses on certain things. And so for the client assistance program, the advocates and staff in that program focus specifically working with clients of the vocational rehabilitation system in New York State. So let's get started. You know, your child is graduating high school and what's next? This is going to be the main topic of today's presentation. First, I'm going to talk about the two New York State vocational rehabilitation agencies that there are. You might be familiar with one that's called ACCES-VR. This is the acronym that stands for the Adult Career and Continuing Education Services Vocational Rehabilitation. I call it ACCES-VR. I try to stay away from acronyms, but it's a mouthful to spell out the agency's name the whole time. So ACCES-VR is one. The New York State Commission for the Blind is another agency that is considered a VR agency within New York State. The Commission for the Blind, however, serves clients pretty similarly to ACCES-VR, except for they serve clients who are only legally blind or completely blind. So ACCES-VR serves clients who have any type of diagnoses that fit within their eligibility requirements outside of legal blindness. And the Commission for the Blind serves clients with vision impairments or legal blindness. So that's really the distinguishing factor. I get questions all the time. Can you go to ACCES-VR if you have a vision impairment? Yes, you can. I have had clients that have received services from ACCES-VR. The issue that we run into is that you cannot duplicate services. So if one works with the Commission for the Blind and one is working also with ACCES-VR, the agencies can work together. They just can't duplicate the same service. For interest of today's presentation, we're mainly going to stick with ACCES-VR. And I'm going to be really referencing that a lot. However, a lot of the same policies, a lot of the same services, and the same structure applies to the Commission for the Blind. There are some distinguishing factors between the agencies, but we will talk about those. So ACCES-VR, let's jump right into it. It's an interesting agency. I'm not sure what you guys are, or how familiar you guys are with it. I'm sure that you've heard really good things about the agency and maybe not so good things about the agency. So I'm hopeful that by the end of today's presentation, we'll be able to sort through some of those things. ACCES-VR is the New York State or a New York State agency who assists individuals with disabilities in achieving and maintaining employment. The purpose of ACCES-VR is to simply help clients with disabilities or who have a diagnosis achieve, maintain, regain, secure employment. There's several different ways that this will happen, and that is what we are going to talk about today. ACCES-VR also supports independent living through training, education, rehabilitation, and career development. So that's, I guess, like the second thing that ACCES-VR offers as well is if the client is ready and able and willing to work, what are the services that the client needs to have to get them to work? And so we'll dive in. ACCES-VR, just like the other VR agency, the Commission for the Blind, they serve clients throughout the entire state of New York. So there are several districts offices located throughout the state. Within those district offices, they have more like local offices as well. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with the state territory, but I'm located in Albany, New York. So there's a district office in Albany, the cities around Albany, Schenectady, Troy, Saratoga. There's other offices for those counties as well, but there's one massive district office that kind of oversees those other smaller offices. You can access this website here. It's on the ACCES-VR website. If you go to district offices, you'll be able to figure out which one is your local office. The website is usually pretty updated. If you click on the closest office to your region, it'll give you a breakdown as well of the ACCES-VR staff. So you'll have the counselor's name, the counselor's email, the senior counselor, and then the leadership that's in that office as well. So if you have any questions about what office you might belong to, the website is actually a really good, useful tool to be able to help you determine which office is local to you. All right, so talking about ACCES-VR and just getting started with the process can be kind of confusing. You can always go to the ACCES-VR website to try to answer your questions. Sometimes clients still are kind of confused after reviewing that on the website. So we're going to go through that today. Basically, you start with filling out an application. It's about a 2-page document that asks your demographic information, who you live with, your permanent address, what your diagnoses are. If you are filling this out for your child, you're going to put their information down. if you have any updated medical information, physical forms, diagnosis letters from your medical provider, you can staple or attach that to the application as well. I always like to advise clients to fill out as much as you can on the application to be able to provide as much documentation and information. But if you are uncertain, wait until you talk to someone at ACCES-VR to, fill it out, just so that way you're not giving any misleading information. The application is pretty straightforward, though. Once you submit that application, you can either submit it online, in an email to the district office or your regional office. You can also fill it out and mail it, postal mail to your office, or you can drop it off in person too. A lot of the offices for ACCES-VR are virtual and in person. So some of them are working remote some of the days, but they are required to work in person as well. So they do have a physical address. They do have a physical location that you can visit. So once you fill out that application, you submit it. We've been seeing about a 30 to 60 day turnaround time, depending on caseloads and backlog that the agency is facing. If you're filling it out for a child, they'll get a phone call or an email, whatever that information is on the application. You'll get contacted at, and they will ask you to come in for an intake appointment. A lot of times these intake appointments are in person. I highly recommend doing it in person. I think that it eases nerves a little bit when you can sit down and kind of have a informal conversation with someone. But it can also be done over the phone or virtually over Zoom as well. COVID definitely opened up opportunities to have remote access to things. And so ACCES-VR is definitely taking advantage of that as well. An intake appointment is when you meet a counselor for the first time. A counselor is often called a vocational rehabilitation counselor, so you might hear the term VRC thrown around. It just means that it's a person that's working at ACCES-VR who's assigned your case. You go in for the intake appointment, you meet with your VRC, they go over the application, they ask for any other medical documentation that they might need. They might ask for financial information if they feel that they need it. They might ask the client to take an evaluation or answer some other medical questions that they have. They're not doctors, but they are they're very full of knowledge in terms of limitations and strengths and those requirements around particular disabilities. And so a lot of clients are put off when they say, well, we might need you to go back and get this physical form filled out, or we might need you to sign a release form so I can talk to your doctor because I have outstanding questions. They do have a right to ask you to do those things. But it's also your ability to be able to say, well, why? Ask those questions. Why do you need more information? Can you tell me what other information you might need? You don't have to consent to it, but if they ask you for additional information and you don't consent to it, they might not be able to move forward with your case. So I would definitely ask questions if you have them. And if you're comfortable, definitely agree to what they are asking you to do. If it doesn't make sense, maybe take a step back, maybe call someone for guidance. But just know that they do have a right to ask for those things. Once your intake appointment is done, you're finished, you determine eligibility, which we'll get into. Then you start working with a counselor. They usually contact you anywhere between once a month to once every few months. Depending on the situation for your case. If someone is very active and needing something, the VRC might contact you a little more frequently. If it's a case where you don't need quite as much, then maybe they'll talk to you, a couple times a year. It really does go case by case. I will say though that a counselor oftentimes has 200-300 people, if not more, to their caseload. Their caseloads are huge. And from someone who has been working in this field for almost 10 years, I will tell you that it's not on purpose that counselors forget about their clients. It's just that they're busy and they're inundated with work, and it's very hard to keep up with the demands that their jobs are placed with. So it is very important that once you start working with your counselor and you know who it is, you get their email, you get their phone number, and that way you can make sure that you can always follow up with them as well. Once you're assigned a counselor, you're ready to work with ACCES-VR, and then the process very much starts. So one of the questions that I always get is, how do I find an application? ACCES-VR has the application on their website. You can also contact your local office to get a copy of the application. You can stop in person to your local office to get an application. And the one that I like to throw in there the most is that you can always contact me at DRNY, and I'm happy to send you the application as well. Again, this is a lot of information, so sometimes I do reiterate and just in case someone misses something. But the application usually takes anywhere between 30 and 60 days to get processed. So it is recommended that you prepare as much as you can if you are seeking services from ACCES-VR. So that way there is time to process the application and things are not delayed. All right, this is a pretty powerful slide. A lot of people have questions about eligibility and what that means. ACCES-VR basically determines eligibility based on whether or not someone has a physical or mental impairment that is a substantial impediment to employment. A client can benefit in terms of achieving an employment outcome consistent with the individual's diagnosis, or requires VR services to prepare for, secure, maintain, retain, or regain employment. These are three relatively what seem simple bullet points, but they can be pretty detailed when talking about eligibility. And so it can be confusing when talking about eligibility. We're going to break it down a little bit. The first one is talking about a diagnosed disability. Your doctor has diagnosed you with any kind of disability. It can be ADHD, it can be a mental health diagnosis, it can be a developmental disability, it can be a physical disability. We've had clients be determined eligibility based on the fact that they've had hip surgery and they weren't able to return to work because they were a teacher before they had surgery, and then after surgery they just couldn't stand on their legs for 7 hours a day. So there's a wide range of what impairment means, but if you have a doctor's diagnoses, then that can kind of help narrow things down. ACCES-VR very much likes to have documentation. They like to make sure that they have knowledge of what your limitations and your strengths are, and that documentation from the medical provider very much helps. Employment and looking at employment with a diagnosis can also be ambiguous. ACCES-VR very much wants to look at how old is the client, what is the client's diagnosis, what are the strengths, limitations, is the client able to do this job goal that maybe they once had? Do they need a new job goal because of their diagnosis changes? Those sorts of things. So that also plays a part, and then requires VR services, again, to prepare, secure, maintain, and retain employment. This is also a little ambiguous because it covers people who are interested in working, who never worked before, to people who have worked their whole entire life. But as long as it is tied to employment, then that's the main goal of eligibility. So this is also a really important question. What age can I start working with ACCES-VR? ACCES-VR starts working with clients at the age of 14. It seems young, but it's true. Services that a 14-year-old might receive compared to services that a 60-year-old might receive, they kind of look different. They also can look similar depending on what the clients are asking for. You might not always work with ACCES-VR. directly. They might refer you to work with vendors as well, depending on the service that you're seeking. And then I put this in there because I think it's true to today's presentation, but what is the best age to try to look for college funding and placement services from ACCES-VR? If your student or your child is in high school and they're looking to apply to college or job placement, I would really recommend them start working with ACCES-VR at around 16 or potentially 17, right around the junior year of high school. If you're in your senior year, it's not too late. I always tell my clients it's never too late. The process can just take a while. So we want to try to be as proactive as possible when planning. You know, if you're 14 years old and you're saying ACCES-VR, I want to go to college, but you're only 14, ACCES-VR might be able to offer you certain services like job counseling or job exploration to figure out what you might like to do in college or what limitations you might have with the medical diagnoses that you have, but they're not going to be able to guarantee sponsorship for college at 14. Right? So those services that you have at 14 will differ than a 17-year-old or, like I said, like a 60-year-old. You are never too old to work with ACCES-VR, and that's a really important note to take, is that I've had clients who are 80 years old. I've had clients who are 30. I've had clients who are 14. Sometimes 65, 70-year-olds still want to work. They want to work part-time. They want to get out of the house. They want to do something else to fulfill their time. They don't feel they're ready to just not work anymore, but their health is declining. They have some diagnoses or limitations that are stopping them from doing what they used to do for work. They can be eligible for an ACCES-VR case. Another important note is that you are able to have more than one ACCES-VR case. So if you're 14, you want job exploration or job counseling, trying to figure out, you know, what comes next, what's available to you. You successfully close that case out, and at 17, you want to go back to ACCES-VR to ask for other supports, you're able to do so. The trick is that you just have to fill out a new application. So once your case is closed with ACCES-VR, to have a new case, you do have to fill out an application. So the process, again, kind of starts you back at the beginning, but you're allowed to have as many cases as you want. The one caveat to all of that is that if a client has a case and the case is closed because the client's disrespectful, wasn't successful in finding a job or maintaining a job, whatever the reason might be, but it might not have gone as planned, ACCES-VR will look at that, right? So if you apply for a new case, the counselor might sit down with you and say, listen, you had a case 2 years ago, but you never followed through. We offered you help finding a job. You never attended those meetings. You never followed through. You just kind of stood up the meetings and didn't really do anything. They're going to ask you what has changed. They're going to ask you, are you ready to move forward now? Are you going to stay committed? Because ACCES-VR isn't a free-for-all agency where they can just fund every service a client wants, right? That would be great, but not in the world we live in, unfortunately. So they want to make sure that they are really offering these services to clients who are dedicated, because at the end of the day, their main goal is to help clients find employment. All right. How do I know if I qualify for services? So if a person receives Social Security income or Social Security disability income, a person is automatically presumed eligible for VR services, right? If you have Social Security benefits, you already have that diagnosis, presumably that you have some type of disability. If a person is under the age of 18, ACCES-VR may look at the parent's tax returns to determine financial eligibility. This bullet point right here gets a little tricky. Some counselors look at ACCES-VR's financial eligibility policy and interpret it differently. So I've had clients who are 17, they're starting school and going away to a 4-year college, and the mom is not married. She's technically a single mom with one income on her tax return, but she has her mom, the client's grandma, living in the house with them. I had a case open for 2 years because ACCES-VR was saying that the grandma's income also counted towards this granddaughter's eligibility and that she financially wasn't eligible for services. I've had other clients who at 18 go to college. They have two parents living with them, married, they're below the financial threshold, they get sponsorship. I've had other families where both parents are married, the client was in a wheelchair, had significant disabilities, was seeking college tuition assistance, and the family was over the financial threshold, but they were able to use the cost of the disability services and the medication that the client took daily to lower the financial threshold. So they qualified for services. So there's lots of different views of financial eligibility when it comes to ACCES-VR. It's not always a one case fits all situation. You might hear from other students or other families or other clients that they were deemed financial eligible, and you might get told that you're not financially eligible. It depends, it's case by case, and the counselor looks at the different factors for that case. Medical eligibility versus financial eligibility. Medical eligibility is based on a diagnosis. You might have a diagnosis from your doctor that deems you eligible, but then when it comes to something like transportation, and if ACCES-VR were to pay for car services, for you to be able to take the car somewhere, an Uber, to work every day, you might not qualify financially for those services. So when a counselor comes to you and says, hey, you do qualify for ACCES-VR services, cool, awesome, let's do some job counseling. I want a job. Let's help me find a job. Awesome. And then it's, hey, I need help getting back and forth to that job. Well, you live with two parents in your household where their tax return is $200,000. They might come back and say that you don't financially qualify for the car fare. All right, this is the fun part of the presentation. What types of programs does ACCES-VR offer? So we're going to break these down a little bit more one by one. But some services are college and tuition coverage, job exploration, job placement services, self-employment, and vehicle modifications. There are a ton of other services that ACCES-VR can offer as well. Assistive technology such as computers and any other type of assistive technology that you might need for school note takers, for example. There's too many for me to list all on here, but on their website, they do list a lot of the other services that they offer. All right, we're going to come back to that. So types of services. So job exploration is when your VRC at ACCES-VR refers you to a different vendor that they contract with. There's lots of agencies in the areas throughout the whole entire state that work with clients who are interested in learning what type of employment is out there, learning what type of interests they might have. A lot of clients are unsure what they want to do for work. They just say, I want to work, right? But they don't necessarily want to work at a McDonald's, or they might not be good at Microsoft Word, so Office might not be good for them. So job exploration kind of works with the client to try to figure out what types of interests they have and what type of goal might fit their need. Job placement services are services that a client can be referred to when they are interested in researching different job listings, when they want to apply for jobs. This job coach can assist them with filling out an application, can help them with their resume, can help them look at a job listing and differentiate the different requirements needed, help write cover letters. They're able to give more one-on-one support when looking for a job. And then supported employment is also offered under job placement services as well. Supported employment offers a little bit more hand-holding. Supported employment can also offer the interview skills and the applying for jobs or looking at job descriptions, etc. But supported employment also offers the ability for a job coach to go to the interview with the client and sit down and try to help them during the interview process. Or if a client were to be hired, a supported employment person might be able to go to the job and break down the skills that the client will be doing at their new job. So it's a little bit more one-on-one time, a little bit more breaking down the steps. This isn't for everybody, but a lot of clients do benefit from it, especially if they are new to employment, if their disability or medical limitations are more challenging. I know that I've had cases where they were like, I'm not disabled, I'm fine. I might have a medical diagnosis, but I can work. I don't require supported employment. ACCES-VR asked them to try supported employment, and it was actually helpful to them because they were able to get more guidance on how to do their job, what to do. They felt less anxious because they knew what to expect. So other types of services are self-employment. This is when a person is interested in owning their own business. It is a complicated process, guys. I'm not going to lie to you. I have a self-employment case on my caseload currently that has been open for 2 years. It is a long process. It's a great process. It's awesome that VR has this program. How it works is that you go to your VRC and say, I want to own my own business. They're going to say, tell me about it. You have to have the ability to be able to say, I want this type of business. This is my plan for it. ACCES-VR self-employment policy allows a person to receive up to $11,000 for starting costs of a new business. Really great. $11,000 is a lot of money. However, the client must be willing to go through the process. Like I said, it doesn't happen overnight. The ACCES-VR, they have a self-employment review team. It's a team that meets to talk about all self-employment cases. They look at a business plan that is created by the client. Then they ask questions. My client, who I have currently, has had about 9 business plan revisements. Like, it's a process. It's really great if you're willing to go through it. It can be really helpful. I had a client go through the process. She's an older woman who is a single mom who ended up coming down with some muscular issues later in life, and it wasn't allowing her to return back to her old job. So she wanted to start her massage therapy business. Fantastic. It took 3 years for her to fully able to get her plan approved. She was able to do it. She was able to locate office space. She was able to locate all of the clientele that she needed. ACCES-VR helped her support the startup costs. They were able to get the massage tables and the massage oils and all the other things that she needed to be able to be successful. Client is thriving. It's great. But it was a process. It took about 3 years. Another type of service that I always like to highlight is that ACCES-VR is able to provide vehicle modifications. This is another complex process. A vehicle modification is when a van, for example, is modified by putting a lift or a ramp or some other type of adaptive driving equipment in the van. So these modifications can be very expensive, but clients who live in maybe rural areas where public transportation is not necessarily a thing, or clients who have different types of employment where their work schedule doesn't allow them to take public transportation, this is a really great program. The client is responsible for purchasing the car. However, it is really important that a client not purchase the car until you talk to your counselor. uh, ACCES-VR very much wants to make sure that they approve the car that you purchase. And if they don't approve it, then you might have a little bit of a harder time getting your modification approved. But if you buy the car, they approve the car that you purchase, and they approve that they can sponsor a vehicle modification. They will go through the process of having your vehicle modified. I currently have a client on my caseload that she is a quadriplegic and she needs a van modified for work. And it's taken a little bit of time for us to get there. It's about a year and a half in the process. But through different mechanisms and things where like there's something that she can blow into to try to get the car to steer, and she can use another button to go right and another button to go left. It's incredible what technology can do. But she's in the process of being able to drive her own car, which is really awesome. This is one of the most exciting slides, I think, though, is that everyone's interested in college and training. College and training are two different things in terms of VR. We're going to break it down a little bit. So starting with training, training can look like cosmetology school. Training can look like going to school to become an electrician, obtaining a barber degree. Training can look like office training, like clerical work. Training can look like not knowing how to use the computer and needing to learn. So training can look like a whole bunch of different things. I had a client on my caseload last year where she really wanted to go to cosmetology school. ACCES-VR said, hey, we supported employment services in the past. You can do that job. The client's health deteriorated a little bit based on her diagnosis, excuse me, and she wasn't able to maintain the employment that she had last. So we got involved. I was able to talk to ACCES-VR. We were able to get updated medical documentation and all the evidence that we needed to prove that the client couldn't do her previous job. And ACCES-VR was then able to sponsor cosmetology training for her. It's great, right? The tricky part is knowing what to do and when to do it. It's okay for people to change their minds, right? You start out thinking that you want to do cosmetology, but then halfway through you're like, this might not be for me. That's okay. ACCES-VR, though, will look at that. And so it's really important when you're talking with ACCES-VR about training to frame it in a way that is going to make you successful, because at the end of the day, that's their goal, right? Is to make you successful. So if you find out that something's not for you, we're going to be honest with our counselor and say, listen, this just didn't feel right. This didn't work for me. My limitations impeded somehow, whatever it might be. This is the goal that I would like to switch to. I would like to switch from cosmetology to social work. How do I get there? Right? And then it's up to the VRC to be able to say, yes, ACCES-VR can support this, or no, they can't. When it comes to college, ACCES-VR looks at several different things. So if you're in high school right now and you're looking for them to sponsor college, they look at your GPA in high school. They look at the classes that you're taking in your transcript. They want to make sure that if you are going to college, that again, you're going to be successful. ACCES-VR can cover up to the SUNY rate of tuition. So if that means that you're interested in going to a SUNY school for, let's just say, communications, you could go into ACCES-VR and say, hey, I want to go in and go to college and get my bachelor's in communications. I have a goal of working with broadcasting. Okay, cool. You're going to have a conversation with your counselor about it. Your counselor is going to say, is broadcasting your end vocational goal, right? That's the goal that you're working towards. You have to get to college to get a degree to get to broadcasting, but broadcasting is the end goal. And you say, yep, that's my end goal. And you say, great. We move on. They can afford, or pay up to the SUNY rate in school. If for some reason you go to a private college, associates or bachelor's, it doesn't matter, but it's a private college, ACCES-VR can also pay up to the SUNY rate to that school as well, which is a really important thing to remember. Not everyone knows that. The tricky part is that you have to prove why you're going to a private school versus a SUNY school. I had a client on my caseload that really wanted to do video gaming design. And New Jersey, there's a college in New Jersey, and that was the only school that he could go to that had this program. No other college in New York State had this program. ACCES-VR was like, hey, there are other agencies, though, in New York State that might be able to assist with this. It might not be exactly this one program that you want, but you could go here and you could get this instead. The client didn't want to settle for this instead, right? He wanted to go for the program that he really wanted to. And ACCES-VR ended up covering it, even though it was an out-of-state school and a private school, they were able to provide the SUNY rate tuition. So asking's free. The important part with college, though, again, like training, is trying to figure out what vocational goal you would like to do. If you go to college and say, I want to start with communications, and then the next semester you come and say, hey, communications is terrible. I'm going to switch to a math major. I want to become a teacher. You need to correlate that to and communicate it to ACCES-VR. You need to have that conversation with them. ACCES-VR isn't going to just approve a new vocational goal without some sort of communication being held with them. And that's another important takeaway from today's meeting, is that I encourage you fully to get that email, to get that contact information, so that way you can maintain communication with your counselor. It doesn't mean that ACCES-VR won't support the change. It just means that you're going to have to meet with them and talk to them about it. So in addition to tuition, ACCES-VR can also assist financially with coverage of books, right? Every college student or every training program has some type of book or a material that they need. They can cover those costs as well. They can also contribute to fees as well. ACCES-VR can also help support transportation costs and or room and board services. So if a client can show evidence that they need transportation to and from the college, ACCES-VR might be able to support that. If ACCES-VR, if the client can show that they also need to stay on campus, ACCES-VR can also offer financial services for that as well. The tricky part about room and board services is that ACCES-VR will only sponsor room and board if the client lives within a certain distance away from the school. So if it's, and I don't remember the exact distance, but let's just say for this example, it has to be 60 miles away from school, right? If the client lives close and is only about 10 miles away from school, ACCES-VR might not be inclined to support room and board. However, there are exceptions to every policy. My client was a wheelchair user and lives in a rural area. They wanted to go to college. ACCES-VR approved tuition. They were able to move forward with going to school. The college was about maybe 6 minutes. It was less than 10 minutes away from my client's home. ACCES-VR said, nope, you live way too close. We can't support room and board. The client didn't have reliable transportation. The public transportation that was available wasn't accessible to the client in the wheelchair. So we were able to get ACCES-VR to support room and board coverage. Exceptions can be made. Again, it's case by case. ACCES-VR can also support assistive technology. This is getting a little trickier in today's day and age and the way that the economy is. ACCES-VR used to support laptops a little bit more than what we've been seeing now. Uh, Note takers, reading devices on the computer, like text to speech things, they can support those things too. They're going to ask you though that you check out the free resources at your school first. Is there anything available to you at the library? Is there anything available to you at a public library? You can submit documentation from your school stating that there are no loaner computers, there are no specific assistive technology devices that are available to support you. With that documentation, it does help formulate an argument for them to support one. But the service is there, so you can always try to ask for it. Supporting multiple semesters is a little bit tricky. So ACCES-VR supports one semester at a time. So if a client is going to school and it's approved and ACCES-VR says, yes, we're going to give you funding for the fall 2024 semester. Sorry, we're now in 2025. If the VR says that we're going to give you fall 2025 sponsorship, that's what it's going to be. The client is responsible for turning in their grades and their semester schedule, the financial documents, all of those things for the next spring semester. So just because ACCES-VR has supported one semester, it does not guarantee that they're going to support another semester. It doesn't mean they won't either. It just means that ACCES-VR has a goal of helping clients be successful. And before they sponsor multiple things, they want to ensure that the client is going to be successful doing what they are responsible to do. A client must maintain a 2.0 GPA to continue to receive services. So if you are under a 2.0 GPA, the VRC might put you on probation. A client has one semester to be able to try to get their GPA above 2.0. If you're on the probation semester and you still do not reach a 2.0, ACCES-VR most likely will not support the next semester. Oftentimes what I tell clients in this situation is that they can go to college on their own, do a semester, get their GPA higher than a 2.0, and then they could always go back to ACCES-VR to request more assistance. Okay, graduate school. Graduate school is becoming more and more popular in today's world. ACCES-VR can support graduate school. However, you need to prove that graduate school is needed in order to maintain employment or advance employment. So for myself, for example, I went to school and got my bachelor's in communications and psychology. In order to do social work, I had to go to get a master's, right? I can't do social work stuff without a master's. So if I were to go to ACCES-VR and say, hey, I want to be a social worker, but I need to go to graduate school, right? You print out job descriptions that show that you need a master's degree. You print out requirements that are listed on job descriptions, etc. Right? You show them evidence that says, I need a graduate degree. Cool. Awesome. We move on. Again, ACCES-VR doesn't have to support graduate school, but they can. So it's a tricky service. Important note is that ACCES-VR will cover employment services or training services, but not both at the same time. It's one or the other. So if you're going through a training service, great, you're going to go through the training. If you're going through an employment type service, you're going to do employment, but they can't do employment and training at the same time. An IPE, Individualized Plan for Employment. This is the binding contract between a client and a counselor at ACCES-VR. It is a contract that lists out the services that are agreed upon, the services that are being given. The IPE must be signed between the client and the counselor. That's how you know that it's good to go. Once it's signed, it's kept in the client's files. One of the questions I know that also that people were interested in today is, can I work with ACCES-VR and another state agency at the same time? The answer is yes. Just like I said in the beginning of this presentation, you can work with the Commission for the Blind, you can work with OPWDD, you can work with another state agency, but the trick is that you cannot duplicate services. So if you're getting college tuition covered through ACCES-VR, you can't request college tuition be covered through OPWDD. I have seen that cases are getting a little pushback with working with other state agencies because a lot of state agencies say that they are the payer of last resort, meaning that if another state agency is willing to pay, they should go there, and that we're the payer of last resort, right? We're the last one to pay. So if you are working with more than one state agency, you might need to advocate for yourself a little bit more than what you might if you were just working with one. Client responsibilities. This is really important. The IPE, once you guys come to an agreement, that will list out the client's responsibilities as well. Some example of client responsibilities are maintaining communication and contact with your counselor. Again, get that email, get that phone call going. Make sure that you're talking about your expectations, your job goals, your responsibilities, any mishaps. Hey, I don't have my semester grades yet, but I will turn them in as soon as I can. Maintain that communication. Let your counselor know of any changes that take place with the services that are being provided. If they're providing you with job placement services and you were unable to attend for a month because you were ill with the flu and it just was prolonged and you couldn't recover, let your counselor know that you had to pause services. The vendors will let them know if you don't go, and it always looks better if you tell your counselor yourself, hey, this came up and I wasn't able to, continue the service, but I'm going to continue next month or something. Continue to provide medical and financial documents annually if ACCES-VR is requiring of them. If you don't do it and you don't submit things on time, if they're being requested, it just prolongs your case, and there's nothing that anyone can really do about that. Again, counselors with any state agency have high caseloads. It's unfortunate for everyone involved. So the best thing that I can recommend is always to keep written documentation. Phone calls are great. Hey, I have a question. You get to talk to someone in real time. I agree that people don't use phone calls enough, but it's also really important to create a written record. It's really important to maintain that written communication. If you have a phone call, send a follow-up email. Hey, just writing to follow up on today's phone call. I would like to confirm that you will be referring me for job placement services. Please let me know when this referral has been made. I know that everyone has a busy schedule. It's really important though, because if ACCES-VR makes a mistake, if your counselor goes forward and doesn't have, if they just, forget, sometimes it happens, right? Oh, but we never agreed to that. You did agree to it, and then you have the email that says you agreed to it. So written documentation is always best. Advocacy skills. This is really important for people who are on the younger side, graduating high school. I myself am a mom. I have 2 kids, one with pretty significant disabilities. I know that it's hard to let your child feel uncomfortable sometimes. Your child doesn't like it when they feel uncomfortable. The best thing to do when working with ACCES-VR is to let your client or let your student, or your child have the voice. You're allowed to be there as a parent or as a family member or as a guidance counselor or whatever role you play, but the client is the one who is receiving the services. So if your student goes in and doesn't say anything and you're doing all the talking as mom and saying, hey, this, my son wants this as a job goal, ACCES-VR will listen to you, but they're also going to wonder if this is really what the student wants. The best thing that I can recommend from a parent's perspective is to really work on self-advocacy skills with your child and or student. Family dinners, car rides to and from sports practices, car rides to the intake appointment with ACCES-VR. It's okay to tell them what your interest is. What is your interest? Maybe practice with your child. What types of goals would you like to set for yourself after high school? What are you interested in doing? It's okay if your child says, hey, I think I might want to go to college. I'm just not sure yet, but I have these interests. That's okay too. That's part of ACCES-VR's job, is to work through those questions and those goals and those facts. When a parent becomes highly involved, it makes ACCES-VR a little bit more dissatisfied. They want to hear from the student. They want to hear from the client. I have a mom who constantly calls the counselor, who tells the counselor that this is what she wants and that she's always talking over the client during meetings. ACCES-VR doesn't want to hear that anymore. And they're saying, hey, unless the client talks to me, we're not going to meet with you anymore. Again, I know it's really hard to take a step back as a parent, but it's really important. ACCES-VR keeps in mind that this is kind of like a job interview for the client. Do they come prepared? Do they come well dressed? Do they come showered? Do they have knowledge of what they would like to do for an employment goal, right? It's very important. And the last thing I will say on this is that your child's thoughts and feelings matter too. You know, my daughter has been set on being a vet for a very long time. And just last week, she came home and was like, I think I want to be a teacher. My mom heart was kind of sad. We've done all the prep about vet and all the books and all the stuff. I was like, whoa, what happened to this goal, right? But her feelings matter too. She's the one that's going to be doing employment. So she's the one that should be picking out what she would like to do. If you are dissatisfied with the services that you're receiving with ACCES-VR, you can always call DRNY, Disability Rights New York, for assistance. You can always file due process, which is a formal appeal with ACCES-VR. The best way to do this is to write a written email or some type of written contact stating that you would like to file due process. And also be aware of your timelines, right? If you're dissatisfied because ACCES-VR isn't getting back to you, but they asked you to submit something, be aware of that timeline. If you're dissatisfied because ACCES-VR said that they weren't going to supply you with something that you needed for training, be aware of the timeline of when they gave you that denial and when your course starts. Because if it's a short turnaround time, might not be enough, we might not be able to provide as much assistance for you. But always be aware of those timelines. All right, due process. Really quickly, due process is an appeal which allows your case to be heard by a neutral party. There's a few different stages of due process, and so the beginning stages often deal with other counselors that are not involved with your case directly, but that work with ACCES-VR. And then there's the highest level, which is an impartial hearing, which is in front of a judge. So a neutral party will hear your case and make a decision. There is a 90-day time frame to apply for due process. So again, it's important to pay attention to that timeline. And then if you are seeking representation for due process, you can always contact DRNY as well as another legal representative. Briefly, I know we're heading into question time. The Client Assistance Program in DRNY is a great resource for clients who are going through the vocational rehabilitation process. CAP can provide assistance during the application process. We can answer questions, give you the application. We can provide you with technical assistance on how to proceed with your case on your own. We can also represent you by attending meetings, requesting file reviews, and then we can also represent you at due process as well. So Nancy, I'm not sure how you would like to do this, but I would like to open it up for questions.
Yes. Now let me see. How do I get myself back up there? I don't know.
Should I stop sharing?
Yeah, maybe that's a good idea.
Okay.
Or maybe if I just remove the spotlight. Okay, that's cool. All right, so just a little bit of information. We have a whole bunch of questions. So let me see if I can get this going here. Okay. All right. So one question was about if ACCES-VR will assist with college transition programs. can VR help with those programs and the funding?
Yeah, I've seen that this is kind of case by case in terms of how old your child is, what kind of transition services they need. Um, the answer is yes, and that's a very short answer. But I encourage you to ask Access VR about it. Also, a quick side note is that Access VR has a big priority to work on transition services. It was passed in legislation a few years ago that employment opportunities become more knowledgeable to youth. And so Access VR has done a lot of different programs in the past to try to expand the youth services. So I would definitely reach out and ask.
Great. Another question is in regards to, will Access VR provide support for a young adult with autism who has behavioral issues or concerns? Maybe you could talk a little bit about work readiness and those
Yeah.
pieces of it.
So work readiness is a really great opportunity. It's talking about giving clients control of their behaviors, helping them learn what their limitations and strengths are with their disabilities in terms of employment. The answer is yes, Access VR can absolutely support those things. If the client becomes very dysregulated and unable to focus and maintain behaviors in control, they might refer you out to a different agency that can give you more hands-on, depending on the vendor and the resources that they have. It also depends on what kind of behavioral situations we're talking about, right? So Access VR's main purpose, again, is to get everyone to work and then to refer clients to different programs to help them get to work. But if you're talking about someone who needs a one-on-one, someone who might need a little bit more help regulating, then they might refer you to work with a different agency.
We had a couple questions about supported employment, and it's been a while since I worked in CAP. And I know at that point, there was a limitation on how long someone could get supported employment services under Access VR. Is that still the case?
Yeah, there is a limitation for a lot of the services. So for supported employment in particular, if it goes past a certain point, it oftentimes can be said, hey, the client might just be too disabled to work. And oftentimes what I do in those cases is I get reports from the supported employment vendor. If it looks like the client's making progress, then we ask that time frame be waived and that we get a different referral for, or more money essentially sent to that vendor so that way they can work longer. So it's really important to, when asking for those things, to highlight the client's successes. How many jobs did they apply to? What skills have they obtained during that time? And would it be beneficial for the client to continue that training? And does it look like the client might get employed or take a step closer to employment if they continue those services? So there are waivers that you can ask for and exceptions to be made. And I would very much stay focused on the positive if you were to ask for those things.
Great. I also recommended, if the person is able to get OPWDD services, those supported employment services can then roll in after Access VR's cease. Oh.
Yes. And a lot of the vendors are willing to work with one another. So if you are rolling from Access VR into supported employment with OPWDD, then a lot of people will have case conferences and things. So you don't have to start from the beginning.
Absolutely. They definitely can work together. All right, let's see. Do they check finances of families if the child is now over 18? So if they're an adult, they will
It's a
still
really
check
great
on.
question.
Mm,
I'm not certain that I can give you the exact answer.
yeah.
I've seen it happen several different ways. I've had clients where they're 18 and they have part-time jobs and the VRC is like, hey, you live at home, but you have your own tax return. So we're going to base it solely off of your tax return. I've also seen it where they're 18, not working, and don't collect Social Security. So that way they do have to go off the parent's tax return. I've also seen it where they say, hey, they're 18, we don't have to use the parent's tax return. So I don't want to say yes
Yeah.
or no because I've seen it a whole bunch of different ways. Um, but certainly reach out if you have more questions because we can certainly talk case by case.
Yeah, I've seen that before too, where, they lived with the grandparents or they helped pay the rent and maybe then they didn't, utilize it. So it really varies on a case by case situation. Um, let's see, some of these I answered and some of them, some other people answered too. Let's see. While in the process, of business plan approval, how is the client supported? And are there any financial supports from ACCES-VR during that time?
It's a great question. So unfortunately, ACCES-VR does not provide financial support during that time. So it's not like if a person submits a business plan for self-employment, for example, you have to get the full thing approved before you are allowed to have access to that money. And also, ACCES-VR doesn't just cut you a check for $11,000. They work with vendors, right? So the massage therapist that I was talking about earlier said, okay, I need these tables. She listed them out. ACCES-VR then bought them and had them shipped to her house. So you're still working with ACCES-VR to have the things purchased for you. They're not just cutting you the check. But unfortunately, even though it can take 2 to 3 years, there is no financial support coming from them at that time. You have to wait for the final approval.
Yeah. Can an individual use waiver services and ACCES-VR to fund vehicle mods? That's one
Tricky.
we've been exploring that one a little bit.
Yeah, we've been exploring it. I don't have an exact answer for you. I know that ACCES-VR goes case by case in terms of how ACCES-VR handles vehicle modifications alone, much less how they handle vehicle modifications with other state agencies and different things. So I'd say if you have further questions on it, maybe we could talk one-on-one.
Sounds good. We had some questions about if they needed a major before they started college, and I explained that it must be linked to an employment goal. You can't just walk into ACCES-VR and say, hi, I have a disability, I'm eligible, and I want to go to college. It has to be, I want to go for social work, which needs college. So make sure that your semantics are posed correctly because ACCES-VR will say, or some of them will say, no, we don't sponsor college. It isn't that they sponsor college, they sponsor the employment goal. So make sure that you verbalize it correctly.
Yes.
Let's see. Some people wanted to know if you had any suggestions if their child does not qualify for ACCES-VR.
If your child doesn't qualify for ACCES-VR, I encourage you to call us, Disability Rights New York.
Yeah,
Whether or not
most people
it's a
do.
valid, yes. Whether or not it's a valid denial, we can certainly assess it and help you determine whether or not it's valid. But the first step I would recommend is to call us and we would be able to help you take a look at that.
There are so many steps involved to protect you if you are seen as not eligible. Trial work experience and so many areas that might get skipped over. So please call us if you do get a denial and it seems odd.
Yes. And like I said before, the medical eligibility versus the financial eligibility can be confusing. So they might be saying that you're not financially eligible for something and you're misinterpreting it and misunderstanding it. It might not be explained correctly. So it's a process. Please call.
Let's see. Have you ever, and I wasn't sure about this one, have you ever had ACCES-VR connections with SYEP, the Summer Youth Employment Program, or they just two completely worked separately?
I'm not sure exactly where the program stands now. Under the Youth and Transition Services, ACCES-VR started something called the Potentially Eligible Program, which it's its own program essentially for students with diagnoses who might be interested in ACCES-VR services but aren't fully eligible for a case, they haven't applied or they just haven't wanted to apply yet. They worked with vendors around the state to provide more exposure to youth in terms of job interviewing skills, resume writing, job counseling, just different workshops for youth. And I'm not sure if that was part of the program that was referenced in the question, but I want to say it was. I just don't know what involvement it is that it is now.
Okay. Can you explain the difference between Pre-Ets and ACCES-VR? My child is 17 and had Pre-Ets for about 3 years, but nothing is happening. I asked for career exploration and was told she needs to apply for ACCES-VR. Isn't she in ACCES-VR if she's in Pre-Ets? Great question.
It's so confusing, right? So the Pre-Ed stuff, right? Youth in Transition Services is, it sounds like your child might have been enrolled in something that I was just talking about, where ACCES-VR offered workshops and all of these types of programs to youth to get the knowledge about employment, encourage kids to start working, et cetera, earlier, but that they weren't actually deemed eligible for ACCES-VR services. So it gets confusing because yes, ACCES-VR has the grant. They essentially work with vendors to be able to provide these services. So you see ACCES-VR's name, but it doesn't mean that your student or your child is actually receiving ACCES-VR services. So if you've never applied for ACCES-VR services and you never submitted an application, you haven't been deemed or eligible or ineligible for VR services. So I would recommend filling out that application.
Are all ACCES-VR services based off of income?
No.
Can you tell us which ones are not?
So it's changing a little bit in terms
Okay.
of like the financial threshold, but a lot of job counseling, a lot of job placement services, those ones are not necessarily based on income, looking for employment. Training, college, the vehicle modification ones, those can be based off employment depending on the, financials, depending on what your case situation is.
If the person has SSI, are they eligible for ACCES-VR?
So a client with Social Security is presumed eligible already, but that does not mean that ACCES-VR will not ask you for things. If you do receive Social Security benefits, they will ask you for a copy of your award letter. They'll still ask you for medical documentation and et cetera.
If an adult qualifies for access, what if the job they secure doesn't provide them financial ability to pay all of their bills? Would they help get them other financial assistance?
So ACCES-VR won't necessarily offer to get someone else financial assistance. They might be able to make a referral for like benefits counseling
Right.
or some other type of counseling that they don't provide. They work closely with independent living centers and across the New York State to provide that counseling. So they could provide financial counseling, but they can't necessarily provide other financial support. If it is a concern though, right, you can talk to your counselor and say, listen, this job just isn't enough money. Could you maybe explore with me other opportunities? It could be changing my job goal. You know, is there something else that you can offer? It's communication, and asking is free. We can't always guarantee that they're willing to do it, but I suggest that if you're having financial hardship, that you do talk to them.
Somebody asked, what is potentially eligible? That's a protected word there.
Yeah, it's kind of a really confusing program that ACCES-VR has been offering. Potentially eligible basically means that, again, it's for youth in transition, 14 through 21. When you're in high school, entering high school, you have these resources available to you to learn what comes after high school, what resources are available, what are your rights as a student with a disability. And that just means that you're receiving these services without being fully eligible for an ACCES-VR case because you've never applied for a case.
Here's a great question, okay, and a very honest person. What would my very first step be after this webinar? I'm very overwhelmed and not sure where to begin. My child graduated and is in a transition program at a university through her high school. It's not really college.
Well, thank you for coming today because that's the first step. This is very overwhelming. It's a lot of information. As much as I tried to make the slides as simple as possible, it's still very overwhelming. Feel free to always reach out to me. My contact information was on the slide, and Nancy, I'm not sure if you
We'll be
can
sending it
circulate
out.
that.
Mhm.
Feel free to reach out to DRNY. We're happy to answer your questions. If you're interested in receiving VR services and working with ACCES-VR, the first step would be to fill out that application and have that submitted. You can submit it for your child, but your child will need to also be present to meet with ACCES-VR. So depending on what program they're in or how far they are from you, they will need to be present for that meeting. But feel free to reach out with any questions. Thank you for being honest. I
Yeah,
acknowledge
definitely.
that it's a lot of information and it sounds like you're doing a great job.
Here's a question that I remember struggling with as a CAP advocate. Someone is eligible and they Access VR wants to provide them services, but there are no services in that rural area. What do we
Yeah,
do now?
that's a struggle that we're still facing.
Yeah.
Also just in the world that we live in, a lot of services are shutting down or they're on leave right now. Like there's maybe not as much as we wish that there would be available to us. One of the things that I have done in the past is that if you live in a rural area, I've asked to have the client work with the next closest provider. It's not always convenient, especially if the provider is 45 minutes away or if the client doesn't have reliable transportation. However, COVID has opened the world to virtual a
Mhm.
lot, right? A lot of people are working remote. A lot of people are able to do meetings remotely. So that does help with vendors. So I would ask if there's any vendor that can work remotely with you, or if there are any other services that are close to your region.
This person shared that they were told that if we apply for Access VR and the person is denied, will they lose or that they would lose their Pre-Ets? What do you do then?
So I think it depends on who you're receiving pre-ets through, and if it's through um I don't necessarily think that that's 100% true, but I do think
Mm,
it's case by case. So if you are, because if you're receiving pre-ets and if you're receiving it through Access VR, you're not fully eligible or determined eligible anyway. So I think that question needs a little bit more information before I can give exact guidance, but um, I think there might be some wiggle room for you to apply.
yeah. Is it true that once the person qualifies for Access VR, the eligibility is for life? As long as the individual is doing their part by working and showing up and things don't work out, can a new case be opened?
So eligibility is not necessarily for life. It's a rumor that I'm not sure where it started, but it's still going around. People still hear
Mhm.
it. Once you have a case, and if you are successfully employed, or if you are, oh, I just saw Suzanne comment. Thank you for clarifying that. For if you are determined and eligible for BR, then you are no longer qualified for pre-ets. So I learned something new
Okay.
today too. Thank
Okay.
you, Suzanne. But it is if you are successful and you have a job for a certain number of months and you are showing that everything is good to go, they're going to successfully close your case. But like I said, if you have trouble, if you need more assistance down the road, you can always reapply for services and submit a new application.
All right. I think we've gotten all of our questions. We will definitely provide you the slides and we will provide the contact information for Brenda and also for the CAP program. Here's a question. We filed for Access VR for our 19-year-old grandson. A counselor from Access VR met with them at BOCES and she said that she felt the program was not a fit for him. We didn't ask why. He has autism and can be lower functioning. What do you think about that?
So my piece of advice is to always ask the why. It's
Yeah.
really important for you to know.
Mm.
Is it the BOCES program saying that they're not a good fit? You know, was it ACCES-VR getting reports that are saying it's not a good fit? There's multiple factors that always go into these situations. It's really important for you to know why it wasn't a good fit. Like I said, if you have a case and you go back to ACCES-VR 3 years later, they can look at your old case, and this could eventually come up again if you go back for services, right? This wasn't a good fit, but you have no idea why, right? Okay, well, we worked with BOCES and it didn't work out. So, you know, we're going to have to think about what to do with your grandson, but you have nothing to be able to advocate for. And you have nothing to advocate on. So always ask the question why. You are absolutely allowed to know. You are absolutely allowed to get that denial in writing. And always ask those questions. If you need any further assistance or guidance, please feel free to reach out.
Okay. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here. Oh, can you explain the job save?
Job save, yeah. So that's something that I usually leave off of my slides just because it's a very rare occurrence that we do see it. But if a client needs help saving their job in some type of way, they need a piece of assistive technology, they had a new diagnosis that is impacting their current position, and ACCES-VR can provide something to save your job, then that's available to you as well. I had a client that had a traumatic brain injury. She was successful in working. Everything was going good. She ended up having a stroke, and that was like a complication of her traumatic brain injury, and she wasn't able to return back to her job at the same functioning capacity that she was before. And so ACCES-VR was actually able to offer a job save. She was able to call her counselor and say, hey, yeah, I was successfully employed, but this happened. I need some help. ACCES-VR was able to put some assistive technology in place for her to be able to return to her job and to be able to work and maintain her employment at this position. So there are services also in place to be able to assist you in keeping your employment, even if some changes occur.
Any other questions that folks have? I do want to provide you with the survey link, and I will post it in here, but like I said, it will pop up after we are done, and we'll send it out to you as well, because we really like to hear what else you would like us to put on by this special ed task force. Are there private agencies that do the same type of job support that ACCES-VR does?
I don't know about private agencies particularly, but I do know that there are other types of agencies that offer similar services. I don't like the independent living centers offer job coaches. They offer people to offer job exploration and job counseling. But in terms of services and getting, you know, training and college and all of these other types of things, ACCES-VR is one of the most familiar ones.
Yeah, Department of Labor has some programs too. But if your child has a disability, you should definitely apply for ACCES-VR, even if you have OPWDD, because there are services that you can get through ACCES-VR that you might not get through OPWDD. So please, keep that in mind. Any other questions anyone has? This has been a really great presentation, Brenda, and I appreciate you updating me on some things as well. I encourage you all to reach out to us if you have questions or comments. And thank you again. And we wish you guys a great school year and support for your kids and your students and the people that you support. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.